So, as always at this time of night, we do the press preview. It's our first look at Sunday's papers, and tonight we'll check out the headlines with the political correspondent at The Guardian, Aletha Adu, and the former No10 speechwriter, Asa Bennett. Great to see you both. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at the front pages that we've got in, starting with The Star, leading with news of Phillip Schofield's departure from this morning, with the headline reading, Holly 1, Wally 0. The front of the Sunday Mirror leads with the same story. Their headline, they think it's all sofa. It is now, as Phil stands down from this morning. And ITV, we've had our fill, reads the front of the Sunday People. Suella tried to cover up speeding offence, reads the front of the Mail on Sunday, as there are claims the Home Secretary may have breached the ministerial code. Same story splashed on the front of the Sunday Times. Its headline, Braverman asked civil servants to help her avoid speeding fine. Brexit will be a roaring success. The Sunday Express has an exclusive with the Business Secretary as she jets off on a £1 trillion trade mission. Here's your Sunday Telegraph, the headline reading, Migration Czar backs student visa curbs amid a row over immigration. And as we always remind you, you can scan the QR code that you see on screen during the programme, have a look at the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And doing that with me tonight, Aletha Adu and Asa Bennett. So let's get cracking. And Aletha, I don't know what you think about the Phil and Holly story. It's on many of the front pages, especially the tabloids, of course. Many people will be saying, you know, with the cost of living crisis, with war in Ukraine, why are we so obsessed with these two?
Yeah, so they've been the face of, morning TV on ITV for decades now. They've won awards together because of their intense chemistry. And you've got to remember, they find a digestible way of providing news for people, for families at that time of the day. So, I mean, they are familiar faces to many, and it will come of disappointment to some people. Others may have seen this coming for some time, given the intense speculation around their relationship over the last few weeks. We've been hearing of Holly desperate to keep her job, but really struggling with the fact that they're no longer friends behind the scenes. Been hearing from all sorts of body language experts, desperate to see if there are any sort of visible signs of tension between the two on the programme. But I think it's just remarkable that given 20 years on the show, Philip wasn't given this incredible send-off that we'd usually see on programmes like this. Instead, on a sunny afternoon, he dropped a statement, not even on Twitter or anything. He used Instagram and Instagram story to highlight the fact that Thursday was his last show, which would be, surprising to us all. Why wasn't he given that chance? But also, Holly's statement seemed to be quite, toned down. Some may say that she simply said the sofa will not feel the same without him. That could be for good or for bad, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, her statement was very succinct, wasn't it? And Phil's statement didn't even mention Holly at all. Just looking at the front of the Sunday People, Asa, ITV, we've had our Phil, and there was a bit more detail here about perhaps what went wrong. ITV bosses told him it was time to go. His fate was sealed at a bosses summit on Friday. So it would seem that he jumped because he was being pushed.
Yes, the idea basically that he has been jumped before he was pushed, forced to resign rather than being sacked. It's very much like the politics meets showbiz now. As we've seen, the couple were, they were fixture at everyone's TVs, it seems, for many years. We've seen them on This Morning. We used to see them on Dancing on Ice. And, Phil had all sorts of shows. I think I remember The Cube and other things he'd do on This Morning. The highlights, lowlights, they range from, if memory serves, when he came out and was interviewed by Holly in a very emotional chat on the This Morning sofa, to more controversial ones, like when he was talking to David Cameron. And I seem to recall that at that time, there was all sorts of allegations about Lord McAlpine. He basically then waved a list of names that he thought, because he'd just done some research on the internet, Prime Minister, he said, and had shown these names of people who were the social media thought were, suspected or alleged child abusers, and the names could be seen on camera. So it was very sort of awkward, clunky, but you had to see it. My God, what live TV that was! Amid all these travails, then to absolutely go down in the flames like this, where you've had days of bloodletting, it seems, in the media, briefing and catfights, it seems. I think there were sources telling one paper the other day that Phil was like the Grim Reaper, and that Holly was saying it was either her or him that has to go. So clearly, the papers are very pro Holly now because she is the survivor.
Yeah, and Aletha, just a final thought on this, really. Just having a look at the Daily Star. Holly 1, Wally 0. It certainly seems as if the paper's verdict is that Holly is going to come out of this far better than Phillip Schofield, although he has been told that he's still got a new primetime show coming up. He's presenting the Soap Awards next week, I think. In terms of ITV, how do they manage this from now on? Their crisis management hasn't been brilliant up until this point because, as you say, there's been so much speculation over recent weeks in the papers. Now this bombshell has dropped. Where does ITV go from here?
Yes, well, I mean, earlier today we heard from the likes of Eamon Holmes, who was also a familiar face on this show before Holly and Phil took over. And he was sort of insisting that this programme is an institution and it will survive even if both of those presenters went, because people love the show. And regardless, of which incredible face decides to come into the programme, people will always tune in because it's something that they will do. It's part of their lives. It's part of their routines. But I think ultimately, as Asa pointed, it seems as though the papers, at least the tabloids, have gone on the side of Holly. She has been, it seems as though she was the victim of quite like a nasty briefing earlier this year when she was forced to take a brief break, apparently due to an illness. And it seemed as though the sources are claiming that Phil seemed to sort of highlight an illness that she was going through, which was completely unnecessary and quite violating of her privacy. And it seems as though from that point onwards, as earlier this year, tensions really started to flame. But ultimately, the question is, are people really that into the sort of breakfast TV couple? Do people really see this as something that they need to carry on with going forward on television, or will this saga on ITV see the downfall of such programmes and possibly a move into something else? We'll have to see.
Yeah, we will have to see, won't we? OK, Asa, let's move on to the Mail on Sunday. Picture of Philip and Holly on the front there. In fact, with your TV shirt that you're wearing tonight, Asa, maybe you should think about an audition for the sofa. Who knows?
I was trying to pitch. I thought I'd just, soft soap this, see if everyone get ideas.
Well, I think it's working. You talked about showbiz and politics. Let's move on to politics. And I think two papers both seem to be claiming this as an exclusive. We've got the Mail front page here. Suella tried to cover up speeding offence. Now, the allegation here is that she asked officials to set up a private driving awareness course after she was caught for speeding. She clearly didn't want to be seen with members of the public.
Yes, and there are questions now flying about whether she may have then broken the ministerial code, because ministers are not meant to have civil servants, get their hands dirty in helping resolve ministers' personal affairs. And in particular, the report suggests that as a result of not getting the officials to do this, she then may have had it resolved more privately, had political aides look into this. It is also interesting to note then that it has been reported previously that she's asked, she was said by other MPs to have asked whether you could claim your speeding fines on expenses. So basically, the knives do seem to be out. They do seem to be being sharpened for the Home Secretary. And I think it may well be to do with the fact that she's giving very bombastic speeches on immigration. She did earlier this week at a National Conservatism Summit. And so I think some people in the party, they clearly have their interests in trying to stoke the waters. Other front pages, I'll quickly just add, they're also talking about rows on migration policy. How do you actually get net migration numbers down? And so, clearly there is some, a lot of people, I think other corners of government will be rubbing their hands with glee on reading these headlines for Suella.
As you're speaking, Asa, the Home Office have just issued a statement, or certainly a spokesperson for the Home Secretary, saying Ms Braverman accepts that she was speeding last summer and regrets doing so. She took the 3 points and paid the fine last year. Simple as that. Aletha, what are your thoughts about this?
Yes, it's just quite interesting that this source close to the Home Secretary didn't dispute the fact that she had asked civil servants to get involved and tried their best to avoid her being seen by members on the public, which would have been extremely embarrassing for her, but ultimately would have proven that she had done the fine and was sort of doing the time in that sort of sense. But the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party are now calling for an investigation and urging the Prime Minister's ethics advisor to really find out if she has broken the ministerial code, because it isn't right for members of public life to be getting people who are meant to be politically neutral to do some sort of cover up in this sense. But as Asa said, the Home Secretary has been subject to a lot of criticism this week, and this is just another knife going into the back. Ultimately, there are cabinet ministers, within Rishi Sunak's team, questioning why the Prime Minister doesn't have enough of a grip on her. He seems to be letting her loose, and she's making all sorts of ludicrous claims on migration at summits like the National Conference earlier this week. But ultimately, this is being, subject to, her comments on migration, rather, with members calling out her racist rhetoric previously, and the fact that she's sort of freelancing on what Number 10 believes in terms of migration has been subject to intense scrutiny. And I think after the wake of these two stories that were both obtained by both papers, I must say, sometimes papers do share exclusives in this format, is giving Tory MPs who aren't happy with her stance on migration another chance to call for her resignation, for example.
OK. All right, we will leave that one there. Thank you both for the moment. Coming up after the break, we'll take a look at some more of tomorrow's papers, including this story on the front of the Sunday Telegraph. Staying with the migration theme, Migration Czar backs student visa curbs is what the Sunday Telegraph have gone with. We'll talk about that and more next. Welcome back. Part two of the press preview. The political correspondent at The Guardian, Aletha Adu, is here, and also former No10 speechwriter Asa Bennett. Asa, front of the Telegraph, tell us about this story. Migration Czar backs student visa curbs.
Yes, this report drills down into the seething row blazing at the heart of government, in which, as we know, one of Rishi Sunak's big priorities is to tackle the channel boats crisis, get a grip on migration. And given that figures currently suggest that the latest migration stats could suggest as soon as next week that there'll be a net increase of 700,000, putting us well on track towards 1 million, then this is not going to go away. Now, admittedly, the reason that we will be seeing record highs in net migration is somewhat influenced, and beefed up by the inflows of refugees from Hong Kong we've been allowing, fleeing Chinese repression, and also Ukrainian refugees, of course. But at the same time, it does cut down to the old balance of, what extent do you then crack down in border control? Well, there are ideas coming from the head of the Migration Advisory Committee, namely he lands on the idea of the graduate visas, that basically there is a risk, he argues, from talking to the Sunday Telegraph, that people come for 2 years, they overstay perhaps, they then slip into low-skilled work. So then maybe there's work there in terms of cracking down on that section. With time will tell, given that the Treasury is known and reported to be resistant to this, along with the business department. And so it's this general tussle of, on the one hand, people like Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, is very much all systems go, keen to crack down on this sort of area and more. And her supporters would say that if you don't, you are dooming the economy to very much low growth, low skills by continuing to rely on cheap labour. So this argument is going to run.
Yeah, Aletha, as Asa was alluding to there are splits, aren't there, not only in the Tory party as a whole, but also in the cabinet.
Yes, absolutely. And, we are waiting for that all-important announcement that's set to come later this week. I think, the problem is Rishi Sunak has made this an incredible priority, migration, cutting it down legally and illegally, essentially. With this story, Professor Brian Bell is essentially saying the scheme has been abused. He claims that foreign students have been getting unrestricted rights to work, and almost they've been getting a 2-for-1 sort of deal that, they can also get 1 year of a master's program, but also be able to bring their dependents and spouses with them and work for an extra 2 years, which has caused concern to him and others that work with him on the advisory committee. He's claiming that the government were warned about this 5 years ago. So I guess questions have been raised to why the government hasn't acted on this sooner. Apparently the story also cites figures claiming that foreign graduate dependents in this country have risen from 16,000 in 2018 to 135,000, backing the argument in this paper that would, arguably call for migration to be restricted naturally, but also that it cites facts that there are 73,000 students that are on visas now. So they're claiming these generous rules really need to be curbed sooner rather than later. And it must be said that this argument, has notoriously been brewing since Rishi came into cabinet around November. I believe ministers were floating ideas on trying to bar any sort of foreign student hadn't had a degree at a top university, whether that be Oxbridge or maybe the top 5 universities in the country. But again, we'll have to see how this plays out later this week.
I just want to squeeze one more story in. Actually, it's also on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, Asa. Noisy heat pumps.
Yes, it turns out that the saviours of the environment that have been much feted by supporters may well be as noisy as fridges. And given how keen the government is to try and have us all install them on the back of our houses, then officials will be doing lots of work to work out if actually it's too noisy. Because if you imagine having loads of those in a neighbourhood, perhaps it will build up to a cumulative effect, like having someone drilling in in your backyard. So let's see what happens with the research. Obviously, it's. For those who are sceptical about these devices, they will find even more evidence. But then, obviously these things aren't silent. Maybe someone will invent silent heat pumps. Give them time.